All right. I am going to go to my next guest, the man himself, Michael Maloof. Michael Maloof. There we are. Michael Maloof, if I can pull this up, is a former senior security policy analyst at the Office of the Secretary of Defense, author, regular contributing editor on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service experience in the U.S. Department of Defense. Michael, welcome to the show, my man. How you doing this morning? You doing okay?
So far, so good, Jamal. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I brought you on because I am confused. I am confused. Now, what I'm confused with, and I'll go with this statement by Trump in order to start it. Okay, not this one. I'll give this statement by Trump, and it'll lead into the conversation on why I am confused. Donald Trump said this, and mind you, he is not being truthful in the statement, so don't look for truth in the statement, but he is making a point. And it's the point that I want to get across and get an answer from you on.
And hopefully he's going to live up. I see he's trying to renegotiate the rare earth. We made a deal for rare earth. It was all done. And I heard through you, I haven't spoken to them yet, but through you, I heard that they're now saying, well, I'll only do that deal if we get into NATO or something to that effect. Well, that was never, number one, discussed. Number two, I think it's going to be very long before Putin. They said you're not going into NATO. And it could be, that's probably the reason the war started. You have Zelensky, and hopefully he's...
All right. Now, that is the reason the war started. Let's put a pin on that part. But two things. The rare earth mineral deal that Donald Trump is talking about, he changed that deal. And he made that deal far more onerous to the point where he is effectively getting control of pretty much Ukraine. I mean, anything that comes out of the ground, oil, gas, rare earths, they're calling it a mineral deal, but it's effectively for everything. The money that Joe Biden gave is now a loan that is to be paid back with the deal to, I think, 4% interest. And Ukraine effectively gets none of it until all of it is paid back. And Trump has used the term like $300 billion. This is pretty astonishing. Now, Trump is acting like it's the same deal. This is the deal we agreed upon. It's not the same deal. And I have this question of, okay, is Donald Trump putting this deal out there with the idea that he can force Zelensky somehow into it? Or is he putting it out there with the idea that he knows they're going to turn it down? Now, Zelensky has already gone rogue. He's like, I'm not taking that deal. He ran to Europe immediately. And he was coddled by the Europeans. And he stood there, he's like, I'm not taking the deal. I'm not going to accept it. I have a plan with the Europeans, etc. The Europeans, when Donald Trump asked about the Black Sea Initiative, they said, no, we're not doing it. Meaning we're not relieving sanctions, which means the Black Sea Initiative is going nowhere. So negotiations at this point have gone nowhere because the U.S. hasn't been able to show Russia that they can really accomplish anything in regards to anything for ceasefire. And Zelensky has been violating the ceasefire from day one, almost in repudiation of Trump, even putting it out there. Did Trump put this deal out there knowing full well that Zelensky and Narada cannot accept it? And if so, why?
Well, there are many considerations here. As I understand the deal, the amount of money that the U.S. would extract would be probably less than what Trump says is $350 billion. But after that amount, it would be shared, and there would be a fund set up for rebuilding and what have you. The unknown is what minerals or in rare earths would there be? I mean, right. that amount. I mean, it's uncertain. In terms of, I think the Trump view is that the minerals deal would be to would in and of itself offer some kind of a security assistance that they're seeking by the mere presence of U.S. presence in Ukraine. That's not. But at the same time, you're hearing Russia say they accept no NATO troops. That would presumably include U.S.
Right.
Even to protect U.S. investments. A lot of people are pushing for Zelensky to go with the minerals deal because it will ensure some kind of U.S. presence, even commercial presence. And at the same time, earlier we heard that even Russia might be interested in, because it contains most of the rare earths in Ukraine, might be interested in a rare earths deal with Trump.
Mhm.
But even that's been held in abeyance, because it's being overshadowed by something else, and that is the fact that, notwithstanding the given the ceasefire that was supposed to kick in with a respect for not hitting energy infrastructure, there is a continuous effort by the Ukrainians to do just that against Russian energy infrastructure. And Trump is, for some reason, claiming then that Putin's not living up to the deal. Well, it's Zelensky who's not living up to the deal. But I'm beginning to think, first of all, Zelensky cannot afford to negotiate with the Russians in the first place. As I've told you on the air, he'll be dead in 24 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And because you have the Azov group and the other neo-Nazi elements that will want to continue that pressure against Russia. And in fact, even though they're integrated now into the Ukrainian armed forces, they don't necessarily abide by all of the of Kyiv's policies. They have their own agenda, and that's scary. And they will work with Zelensky as long as he conforms to their interests. But the minute that those interests diverge, they're on their own. They're gonna do their own thing, and they're powerful enough to do it, and they've demonstrated that. And they're the ones who've been doing the attacks in the Black Sea, and so are working primarily with the Brits. The Brits have been training them. I think they were training them in Wales. They have a facility where they've been training them. So so you got the Brits involved in all of this. The Europeans don't want. The Europeans even are talking about, well, if Trump doesn't want to do an energy or a minerals deal, we'll do one. So we're hearing that, but they don't have any money. So they're gonna be interested in such a deal if they can get it going. And maybe that's what Zelensky's holding out for. But as long as he's getting some kind of assurance from the Europeans, and particularly the Brits, that they will be getting backed up with monetary and logistical support for continuing to wage the conflict, Zelensky is in no rush to settle. And that's why I'm beginning to think now that it's not Putin so much. And I think that maybe Putin needs to call Trump directly and explain, here's what's happening. Our energy infrastructure is being hit, and they've been hit with HIMARS and ATACMS and what have you, and it's been identified that it was the Brits and the French who did the targeting and provided the logistical support for that. So the Europeans are preparing and continuing this initiative against Russia, even though Trump wants a more geostrategic realignment with Russia and renewal of diplomatic relations. I don't know why Trump isn't putting pressure on Starmer of Britain and Macron of France to knock it off, but they've made it clear that they're going their own direction as well, and it's also a signal that we may be seeing that fracture in NATO becoming a real fissure. That we're really going to be seeing a divide there, and as a consequence, the Trump's persuasiveness over the allies, NATO allies, is probably becoming less and less probable as a result.
That means that any notion of negotiations have stalled, and
Totally,
Trump
totally.
doesn't have the capability of ending this war on his own.
You can only go so far. I mean, Trump can be bombastic. He can be appear to be forthcoming with this and working with both sides. But there are too many players involved here, too many uncertainties. If it was just U.S. and Russia, that's one thing. But you have the Europeans, and then you also have Ukraine. They all have their own interests in this, and the U.S. ability, given the friction that exists between the Trump administration and the NATO countries today, is such that that cooperation is not forthcoming, even though most of the hardware that the NATO countries get is from the United States. Now, there is talk the U.S. could really have a adverse impact on Britain's nuclear submarine capabilities, the Trident, because all of their activities have to be done in coordination with the U.S. When it comes to that. So there is that, and also the U.S. can maybe flip a switch on the F-35s that all these countries were forced to buy. So who knows?
That is fascinating to me, because I'm one of those people who are like, why are we selling weapons? I never understood the process of selling weapons. I mean, that's the thing that's used for an advantage. But Trump was like, hey, we have a switch on it where we can just kill it if they try to use it against us.
It's a kill switch, yeah. Yeah. But you see, because of standardization, NATO standardization has always meant, in effect, U.S. standards and products throughout all of NATO countries. Now they're all dependent. Now they're beginning to rush around and talk actively about developing their own defense industries now to become independent of U.S. production, military production capabilities for the future. And we're seeing more and more of that.
Is there any other way that Donald Trump could put screws to Europe? I mean, tariffs, I suppose, is one. Like you pointed out, he could destroy their steel industry.
Yeah.
I guess, what if he stops the sale of weapons? Would that do it? Like, meaning, what way can he put the screws to France and Britain to be like, cut it out? I'm not tolerating this.
Well, I don't know that it could have some impact he could do a combination of things. He could increase tariffs. He could economic tariffs and military hardware and access to technology, software, source coding, all that stuff. He could. There are a number of instruments and that he could undertake if he wanted to go after the NATO countries.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't appear that we're there yet. He just had a meeting the other day with Starmer, and he spoke about how they had a great meeting. Okay, it's like every one of his meetings is great. So, but yet their policies, their approach, they have this meeting. They both glorify the meetings, but then they each go in their own direction. It whipsaws you. You don't know from one day to the next whether they're in tandem or they're working against each other. And clearly, the policy direction that we're seeing of Europe is different from that of the United States. They want to rearm and become more independent of the United States, and pursue Ukraine's interests and back them up, while Trump wants to renew ties with Russia for other geostrategic reasons. So he just wants to leave. He just considers Europe not to be their U.S. problem any longer. After all, when you look at the history of U.S. involvement in Europe's wars over the course of centuries, I mean, it gets tiring. I mean, we're continuously fighting their wars, and as I've said in the past, the Europeans just fundamentally are suicidal. They can't help themselves. We're fighting feuds that go back 300 years. Enough, I mean, the Russians, and there's a history of the UK and the Russians going at each other. It's more than 200 years old. I mean, it goes back even to U.S. history, where Catherine the Great refused to honor the British blockade of the colonies, U.S. colonies.
Napoleon, if I'm not mistaken, Napoleon invaded because of
It goes back that far, at least that far. So, and they've never forgotten it. I mean, they think the Russians really hampered their imperial destiny, I guess. And at one time, Britain was a major power in the world with its navy, but that's no longer the case. Look, a hypersonic from Russia will hit London in less than 8 minutes. So the warning time is a little different than it used to be 300 years ago. And I think, but yet you have the British still thinking in imperial terms, still thinking that there's some fantastic empire. And I tell my British friends, of the few that I have, look, you're no bigger than the size of Indiana. Get it over it.
Yeah. They walk around with that British, I don't know what it is, like arrogance. I don't know what it is. It's like
a real false arrogance. It's a false arrogance, and it gets like really boring. It's really boring.
It's bizarre. It's like you look in the mirror with an undeserved sense of importance, even though it's like you're, like you say, no Olympic.
Well, I think to get to your point, I think Donald Trump is at a crossroads now. I don't think he really knows what to do.
Yeah,
and there are allegations that Putin is procrastinating, is stalling purposely. Well, he's got conditions, and his infrastructure is being hit by the Ukrainians. And even Maria Zakharova the other day pointed out it didn't come from the U.S. It came from HIMARS that were initiated by the British and programmed and targeted by the French and the British. So they're taking an independent course. And the British, by the way, do get HIMARS. People say, well, these are HIMARS, these are American. Well, there's a version of HIMARS that the British have. It's a track version. So it's mobile. So and it's like 70, 80 kilometers range. But they have it, and they have that capability. Plus, they have the targeting capability. They have the information that U.S. has in targeting for targeting purposes because they're NATO. So there's that element, and so they're just using it to assist the Ukrainians, and I don't believe the U.S. is involved in that because they've been told to look elsewhere, not at the Russians any longer. So let's see what happens, but clearly the British and the French are charting their own independent course, and that's something we've got to watch. And I don't think the Trump administration has a response to that as yet.
Putin has to respond to that. I mean, I get it. They're trying to stay with the ceasefire. Fair enough. They think they can absorb.
He did this morning. He basically said, I have conditions and they're not being met. He's basically saying that, and Rybkov, one of the deputy foreign ministers, basically said that we want to work with the Americans, but our conditions are not being met.
Yeah,
and they have to be met. So we're at a stalemate. So it's clear that the principals are going to have to get on the horn to each other and work something out. I don't think. In the end, despite all the bombastic talk of secondary sanctions, which won't work against the Russians, Trump does not want to irritate or create a schism with Russia at this point. They're too big. They're too big, and they are strategic, and they've got, again, more nuclear weapons than we do, and they can be all over the place if they want to be. They don't have the outreach that we have. They're more of a regional power, but even though we are a world power, but that can be tenuous because our capabilities have been worn down over time, and we haven't replenished, and that's another issue altogether. Can we maintain that vigilance, that world vigilance, with our 12 carrier strike groups.
That
Some
can
of the,
be
you know,
skunk.
yeah,
Those things are
and you
class
know,
house.
and you got the Chinese and the Russians who have a capability to knock out these carriers now. So,
Yes.
you know, aircraft carriers. So
Yeah.
they may be obsolete.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's a 1980s weapon, or that's a weapon
Yeah.
that you use against Yemen or something like that.
The only strong leg of the triad is the submarine.
Yeah. That brings me to another topic. Donald Trump is threatening Iran. And apparently he sent the letter. The letter said, either make a deal with me or else I'll wipe you off the face of the earth in 2 months, something like that. I'm paraphrasing. Iran responded to a third party effectively saying, we will negotiate you with a third party, but we're not going to negotiate with you directly. We don't trust you, et cetera, et cetera. I don't blame him. Trump continued on this tirade. This is him again.
The secondary tariffs on Iran, and we'll probably give it a couple of weeks. And if we don't see any progress, we're going to put them on. We're not putting them on right now, but if you remember, I did that 6 years ago and very well, put it mildly. And if the election weren't rigged, you would have a situation where there would be no problem with Iran today. But it was. Biden didn't know what he was doing, obviously, and we have a very rough situation in the Middle East because of that. You ended up with October 7th, and you would have never had October 7th, and you would have never had Russia going into Ukraine likewise. We're going to make a decision on secondary tariffs on Iran based on whether or not they're going to make a deal. If they're going to make a deal, then we're never going to put secondary tariffs on. We're going to hope they have a great, long, and successful life as a country. But we'll see what happens. Very, very interesting. I can't imagine them doing anything else but making a deal. I would prefer a deal to the other alternative, which I think everybody in this plane knows what that is. And that's not going to be pretty, and I do not prefer that. So,
Now, Ayatollah responded to this, and he effectively said, A, we don't believe him. But if he does, there will be a swift, I think he said, a strong response or swift response. Effectively, we will respond in kind to whatever you effectively do. Trump has loaded up military capabilities at Diego Garcia, multiple B-2 bombers, apparently the largest force that has been accumulated for God knows how long, that's waiting there with the thought of attacking Iran. Now, the question is he bluffing? Like, this is a hell of a bluff. And again, wars are unpredictable. The notion that you're going to hit Iran and you're going to destroy all of their missile silos, you're going to destroy all of their capabilities, and they're not going to be able to respond seems outlandish to me.
I think that this administration, unfortunately, is looking at its relationship with Iran and its conduct toward Iran with a certain tunnel vision. They're not looking at a broader geostrategic perspective. I'm afraid that given the importance of Iran to both Russia and China, they would not stand idly by if Iran were attacked. There might be some debate about that. I'm sure there will be, but Iran is too important for them, for those countries, in terms of the north, south, east, and west corridors for trade, and Iran is integral for that. And given the relationship that they now have, and the turmoil that would ensue, political turmoil that would ensue internally, should there be an attack, I think it would bring down all the Eurasian house of cards, if you will, of what they've been working on in terms of Belt and Road and BRICS. Already, we're seeing some cracks in the BRICS initiative. Increasingly, countries are insisting upon, instead of working in local currencies, are now coming back talking about working only in terms of US dollars. So the Trump effect is there with respect to BRICS. Even though they're going to go ahead, even though BRICS is going to go ahead with their effort to
The local currency.
create that alternative financial system to SWIFT. That said, from what I'm hearing, Trump is basically saying that a military response may not be immediate, although we don't know what Israel will do. Sometimes they can go on and drag us into this conflict. That's the problem. That's why Trump is not really in the position of acting and controlling all the movements and calling all the shots. I think that this is and Netanyahu is the unknown card here, and it would be in his interest to drag us into a conflict for his own survival purposes. And I think he would do that as a result of seeing the internal strife inside of Israel beginning to mount more and more and more. So I think that and I think that would be his the base upon which he would then launch an attack on Iran in order to unite the country at that point, because even internally, Israel is on the verge of a civil conflict.
Yeah, that's the case at this point.
So there's this consideration. So there's nothing can be looked at in terms of a vacuum. It all depends upon other elements that come into play, and it can happen like literally overnight.
Do you think they would destroy his presidency? I mean, I don't have this belief that he's going to be able to do this. And Iran, it's not Yemen, it's not Iraq, it's not one of these podunk countries that you can effectively hit and knock over. It's a country of 80 million people. It's 3 times the size of Iraq, and they're extraordinarily sophisticated militarily in regards to their weapons capability. I don't think this is the cakewalk that Donald Trump is implying. And I strongly suspect that their response is going to be withering. Like, there will be major political consequences in the region for the response after, if Donald Trump does something like this. But give me your take on that. I mean, they have said we're going to Brazilian government. We may hit Israel, meaning we may knock Israel off the face of the earth at that point. Like, what do you think that response will be? I mean, they say it will be a reciprocal response. Give me your thoughts.
I think these countries are beginning to pick up a pattern of behavior with Donald Trump that if they just procrastinate, kick the can, and drag him along, there's very little that he can do on his own. Yeah, he could probably launch if he wanted to militarily, but then the battle would be on. Donald Trump cannot afford another war. In fact, he came on board as a peace president to solve wars such as Ukraine and Israel and Gaza, not to create a new one, which would be Iran, and thereby open up that entire regional to a new conflict altogether, which could bring in Russia and China for sure. I don't think that's what he wants, even though you hear Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, saying China is our focus now. We're not worried about Russia any longer. Yes and no, but at the same time, you can't look at these things in a vacuum. You have to look at it in a greater geostrategic basis, and this administration, this White House, is not capable of it.
Michael, man, I always appreciate your analysis. One of the audience members sent the super chat saying, "Thank you for bringing Michael on."
Thank you.
The talk, where is it? Excellent chat with Michael Maloof. Thank you for having him. This was Dolan Deckett. So I wanted you to hear the love
Well,
that
thank
you are
you very
getting
much.
from the audience. Always appreciate
Somebody's
you, man.
listening.
Somebody's listening, right? Michael Maloof, he is former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author, regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service in the U.S. Department of Defense and is a damn good friend of the show. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it, man. Be